Hello and welcome to the Alpha Demo and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software. I'm pleased to be joined by Sarah Mitchell, our Director of Customer Success, and Dion McCormick, Alpha Expert, no relation. Today, Dion is going to be going over part 2 of GraphQL. And here we're going to actually take the theory that you learned last time and put it into practice in Alpha Anywhere. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. Of course, we're here to answer your questions as well. So you can type those questions into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. And I'll be here. Sarah is here. Dion is here. We are all here to answer those questions. You can always send them also to guides, G-U-I-D-E-S, at alphasoftware.com. So let's get started. Hello, Dion. Are you there?
Yes, indeed, sir.
Excellent. Let me go ahead and make you the presenter.
Okay, should be coming
there
through
is your
there.
PowerPoint. Yep, I see it.
Yes, network's been solid these days. I've been pretty happy. That's good.
Excellent.
Well, thank you, everybody. As Dave mentioned, we're here for you. Help us help you by, if you have any questions about the topic today or other topics, put them into the question area of the GoToWebinar control panel. And our crack team will be monitoring that real time and making sure we can try and do our best to satisfy those requests. And remember, if you have questions beforehand, you can always use guides at alphasoftware.com, G-U-I-D-E-S, and send it that. We love getting those emails, and we'd love to have you send us that because it helps us guide in terms of what we want to do in terms of these presentations. What does the mob want? We want to satisfy the mob. You need to tell us what you want. So that's really helpful there. But we really do appreciate you joining us today. Today, we're going to dive into like the part 2 of GraphQL. I'm going to do a very quick recap for folks that didn't make it last time, so they're not lost on this. And Sarah's we've already published the version 1 or the part 1. So Sarah, I think I have that, but I haven't put it on to the chat. But if you could do that, it'd be great for anybody who wants to go back and review part 1. And so we're going to cover that. But before I do that, I have to jump over real quick and make sure people are aware that we have coming up the Devcon. So if you go to alphasoftware.com, Devcon 22, dun, 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 we're talking about September, October, a month and a half. Is that just crazy or what? We're at the last day of my kids are already in classes and stuff. Football season starts, or college football starts there, but we're heavily working on getting everything ready for this amazing event. So I'm sure a lot of people have already signed up, and we really deeply appreciate that. But if you haven't, jump on over there to Devcon 2022, hit register, lock in, and you will not be unhappy with how it goes. So it's going to be a phenomenal event, a lot of efforts going into making sure that's super successful. And then last but not least, we have a new version of the system, which was released on Friday, March 25th. I am currently showing you the Alpha Anywhere Universal Installer, the way to go. And you can see, I'm sorry, build there. I do have I see. I had done that. So I don't have
not up to
the
date,
date
but the August 26th is the latest one, and that is
I'm sorry. Yeah. So this one is a little bit old. It's not that old, but yeah, actually it is, man. March to August. So, but I've been using, by the way, the developer edition is what my demonstration today will be on. And I installed that a little while ago. But anyway, the latest and greatest 8.301 is available. You can click here to get the release notes and find out a little more information about what's in there. But that is now available and online for your use. So just a quick heads up on that. So let me pop back real quick. So we started our conversation a couple weeks about GraphQL. And what it is, basically, it is a very powerful methodology that allows you to simplify the number and intensity of your API calls. Just a real quick background on it. It was developed by Facebook, Meta. They had been building these apps on phones and on actually desktop also, and they were figuring out that to create and pull all the data they needed to create a wonderful user interface and experience for their clients, they ended up having to make a ton of API calls. They'd first call this and then that and that and that. And they realized that that was twofold. One, very intensive in terms of the amount of data that came back, because a lot of data came back you didn't really care about. You also had a large number of calls and intensity on your loads that put lower loads on your server and your applications. So they said, hey, you know, we can come up with a better way where we can make fewer number of calls and get more relevant data back, not more data, but more relevant data back. And it really has turned out to be really, really, really nice. So a traditional REST API, you basically make a call. It then gives you a pre-formatted amount of data that comes back. Easy way to go. Like for instance, this is give me person number one and gives me all of person number one's data. But the only problem with that is that, you know, well, what if I don't want a lot of this data? For instance, what if I just want the first name and last name? Well, there's no real mechanism in here unless you do some fancy weird stuff on your Git, and that just complicates things. So most people just give you the base and then you weed out what you want on the application itself. But again, you're pulling all this data back you really don't need. So with GraphQL, you can do the ability of saying, basically, give me this same person, but only give me this subset of data, and therefore you get that information back. And which is cool, and let me see if I have an example of that. It also has the ability to say, hey, give me hierarchical data or parent-child data, and that's what we're going to focus on today. Basically allows you to say, give me a user and their addresses, or in our case, give me an order and order line items. And therefore, instead of having to make a call for the order, then make a second call for the child information and do all that gyrations, you allow the server to do all the work for you. So you just tell it, hey, give me the user ID name, this information out of the address, and a note. It's only a subset of that information, and you get back just what you want. So the beauty of that is if you're building an application, often you're not showing everything to the user. You're only showing a subset of the universe of data that's available to that person, especially on the summary screens that you're going to before you go into detail. So you don't need to pull all this data back just to show a few pieces of elements. This allows you to do a sequential scenario where you pull back just what you need. And then if they want more information, you can make other calls to bring back more and more rich data as you go from there. And it works really, really well. And it just simplifies things. So instead of having to go through a whole bunch of different calls, 3 calls to get the data, you can make 1 call and it will pull the data out and pull it back into a format from there. So last week we focused on, and I'm just going to pop, and I know that was pretty quick, but I hope most people have already seen it there. So last week we started by building a very simple customer GraphQL interface where I could basically call in and get some customer information. So remember, the way to create a GraphQL service is through the web services button over here on the left. And when you click new, there's an option now here called GraphQL, create a new definition. And this will walk you through the process of building a GraphQL. And if you're interested in more details on that in the actual, go back and check our last presentation 2 weeks ago, and you'll be able to see that. But once you've built that, you can go into it and you're going to see it. Now, you may go, and if you haven't seen the first one, go back, because don't freak out. It looks complicated, but again, like everything, Alpha makes your life easily. What this is called is a GraphQL service definition. Basically, it is a definition file that tells the GraphQL engine. So Alpha, within it, when they put inside both the developer environment and also when you publish it on Alpha Cloud or on the standalone server, etc., built into that is essentially a GraphQL engine that understands how to get a request and go find data, but it needs to know how to find data. And that's what this does here. It basically tells it, for instance, what connection string to use. You may have multiple ones. Then it also, you give GraphQL the structure of the data, like the tables that are available and the fields that are in their table and the type of data that's in those fields. This information is a standard. So this is GraphQL standard stuff to a large degree. I think the connection is our unique piece, but things like how fields are defined, order by, total count, etc., those come from the GraphQL standard specification. So we're relying on an industry, and in fact, it's an open source technology. There's tons of great training on Udemy, a bunch of YouTube videos that you can go see. I mean, it's a very well supported, and a lot of people are moving this direction because of all those really nice benefits of fewer calls, etc. But this is called a configuration file, and this basically allows you to tell it, what you want. And I'm going to go through this and show you how I build this for a order detail. You can see I've already kind of played with that so I don't screw it up too bad. By the way, there is a question. You can build in authorization, and I'll talk to that. Basically, how authorization works is that you can say, hey, when someone calls GraphQL, go run out and run this little app and look up maybe a token. So you can pass in a token with the API request, and then it can check that token. So there's multiple different ways. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes here. There's a bunch of other more sophisticated things like mutations. I'm not really going to cover those today because that's a little bit more advanced, kind of outside the scheme. And the reality is often it's probably overkill for a lot of what you need to do, but it may be interesting. And again, there's tons of documentation out in the marketplace to allow you to look that from there. So one thing I did want to show you is that once you have built your GraphQL service, you can actually test it right within the development environment. So I right-clicked on the service I built. It says test API, and then I go to working preview. And it brings up this really cool interface that allows you, essentially think of it as like a runtime interface to run this stuff. So what you see here is this is my history. So these are things I've done before. And if you watched last time, I'll show you how that all worked. But this right here is the definition of what is going to be sent to the GraphQL. So the way the API works, and I'm just going to pop back real quick and just show you this, is that you create this little payload of information saying, I want person, I want this data, and then it returns the data. So this is called a GraphQL query. So you have to define that and build that and send that to the server, and the server knows how to dissect that, get the information, and send it back to you. So to come up with that and make life easy on there, you have a development environment. Like if I run there, it's going to say, oh, sorry, you didn't give me anything. It's just nothing happened there. But I'm going to go ahead and try one here, and I'm going to click one here. So you'll see that, and let me go ahead and prettify this. That's nice, and run it. And you can see this is that GraphQL query. And it looks a little confusing up front, but once you start using it, it's like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. And it actually even makes more sense when I show you the multi-level capability parent-child stuff. But real simple is you have a command called get customer. You're saying get that customer ID of ALFKey, and then here are the return fields I want to it. So it has its own logic, and I'll show you there's auto completion, which in here is really nice. So you can see once this sends to the server, this is what comes back. So it comes back, puts it into a payload called data get customer, and then you can see customer ALFKey, company name there. And you go, oh, you know what? I also want something else. So maybe we're going to put in their phone. Now I want to show you this is so cool, and we kind of covered it a little last time, is that this interface has auto completion. So it says, oh, I know, you've already created a definition for this customer. I know here are the different fields. Like for instance, phone is one of those fields. So you'll notice that it puts it up there. I go ahead and say, yeah, I want phone. And now I run that, and voila, it brings back the information in there. You go, oh, you know what? I don't really need their title, so I'll get rid of that. And you'll run it, and it gets it there. So this allows you to refine and perfect your GraphQL queries. So once you're ready to kind of put them in your application, you just have to copy and paste this information. I'm going to show you a little bit of how I do that in a little while, in a few minutes here. So this is called the GraphQL query string sort of editor / tester. One of the key features I mentioned last time is that you can save, like it creates a history of each time you do it, so you can see the history, but you can also star them. So if you really like this one, you can always bring this one back, and those are your favorite ones. And so once you have them running, you can store it. So when you close and reopen, this information's here, so you can always go back and get it. It's sort of similar to our genies. Often in our genies, we allow you to save the parameters that allow you to generate the code and other stuff. This does the exact same thing. Okay, so bottom line is that GraphQL is a standard in the industry that allows you to make a single API call with some information, i.e. a GraphQL query, and it will return that data, and that allows you to control the process. So now I don't have to make 5 or 6 calls to get a certain set of data. And that becomes really important when you're starting to do parent-child or multi-level data. So I'm going to switch gears here, and I'm going to show you how I build sort of a multi-level query, and then we'll run those queries and see how it goes from there. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. First, any quick questions or anything from anybody?
Not at the moment.
Okay, cool. We'll look for those. So I'm at the web services here. I'm in there, and I'm going to go ahead and click new. and I want to create a GraphQL, so I'm going to click that. Okay. So now it gives me, remember, that definition file. Now I could literally start typing into this if I was a smart guy, but I'm not a smart guy. I'd rather have, and there's so many odds that I'm going to mistype something and screw it up. So Alpha takes care of everything for you. So first I need my connection string because I need to tell the GraphQL service where I'm going to go. And here's the cool thing. This connection string, I could have multiple connection strings in my app. So I could have it going to a SQL Server database, a MongoDB, God knows, and this takes care of all of handling the complexity for me. So you'll see down below, we have a series of little URLs. So I'm going to change the connection string. And I've already built our A demo Northwind. So I'm going to select that. And you'll see as I do that, it's updating my definition file to understand there, but I don't have any tables. So right now it knows how to connect to the database, in my case, A demo Northwind, but doesn't know the table. So next is you pick the tables, this next item right here. So before, when I did it, I just clicked customer and said save, and it did it. It grabbed the information. That's one of the cool things also, is it is smart enough to go read the database and say, oh, that's it's an integer, that's a string, that's this type of data, etc., and handle that. Even though you can tweak it, it does all that introspection to take care of that for you. But in this case, what I want to do is I want to select order and order details. So I'm looking at orders and order details. So I'm selecting it. And there's a parent-child relationship where order detail is a sub of order. So I'll click save. So boom, Alpha took care of writing my definition for me. And you'll see that it went out and said, oh, okay, here's your first table. It's called order, or actual name is orders. And then you've got certain things here, and this is where you control what you can do. GraphQL is cool. I've been talking about reading data, but GraphQL can actually write data and delete data. So this says, oh, you can do everything, but if you wanted to override this stuff, you can say, I don't want you to be able to delete things. So you can overwrite stuff right here. Like I don't want them to be able, so let's say we want this to be a read only, and I misspelled that. Let me go here. So you can tweak these things. And again, this is standard with GraphQL, so these kind of commands. But this now says, hey, I can query the data, but sorry, I can't insert, update, or delete. And so you can modify that to your heart's.
Interrupt you for a second, because
we had sure.
Came in that may not make sense after we leave this box. If you go up to the top, you have a connection string that you're pointing to, and that presumably is a SQL connection string. Is that right, or one of?
In this case, yes. Well, it's a SQLite table, but it is a SQL connection string.
So the question is it possible to go against something that isn't a database engine? Like, could you use a simple storage connection string and have it go after a file or something like that?
I think this has to be a database connection string versus a storage connection string.
That's what
I don't know.
Well, but I wanted to make sure that I got the question in.
Right, but within the storage connection string, it understands how to talk to SQL Server, MySQL, etc. So it does relieve you of that knowledge of the underlying database architecture kind of scenario. But I think storage strings are a different animal.
Yep.
Yeah. Gotcha. Okay, cool. So you'll notice that, and I took a divergence, but I wanted to show you where you can control this and say, all I want them to be able to do is query. I don't want them mucking with my data here. But if I scroll down, you'll see that it read all the fields and understands what the type is. So it has all that information on how to properly format queries and other things like that. But I want to scroll down a little bit and show you the other thing it did very cool is that it added this thing called children. And that children is basically it's saying that a order will have children, and that is of type order details. So basically it's established that parent-child relationship. And if you'll notice, now I go down here, it says, oh, okay, here's that child record. And same thing, it has the order details, it has the different fields, etc., that are available. So it did all this work. And you don't have to worry about structuring all this, it'll handle there. But I'm going to go ahead and say you can insert this. And it's possible you may want to be able to insert child records, but not the parent ones. I mean, you never know what you're doing. It's up to you to really decide that. But I'm just going to do that for now, just to show you. So now I'm saying, hey, you can query both parent and child, but you can't do that. So again, point and click. I click the tables. I can re-click and add more stuff there. It looks at the relationships based on the foreign key relationships, primary keys and stuff, and sets all that up and puts it in here. But then you can fine tune this in terms of being able to modify sort of behaviors. And also you can really even, you know, change types and stuff. I don't usually touch that stuff, but you can do that if you want to for whatever reason there. So now that I've done that, I'm going to save this and I'm going to call this, and I've already got one, but I'm going to go ahead and call it 2. Okay, so I'm going to save that. And now I have my order detail 2. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to test that. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is in here, I'm going to start typing. So again, I can cheat and go over here, but I kind of wanted to show you if I'm just starting from scratch what I would do. So remember, we have order and order details. So let's just get an order. Let's get one order. So I'm going to say get, and you'll notice that get is your keyword, because you'll notice now I have get an order. That means get a single order, get more than one order, which is get many orders, or this could be get order details. So get a single order detail record, or get many order details, get multiple from there. So let's start simple with get order. And then now the way it works is you have to say, you open this parentheses and it's saying, well, how am I going to find that order in terms there? So let me go ahead and just say customer ID, since we kind of know that. And remember, this is JSON representation. So you're going to see things instead of a comma or an equals. Excuse me. We have a little thing there. So we've said get an order. Here's my search criteria. Oops. Here's my search criteria. Geez. Right there. Okay. But I don't have a properly formed because, oh, geez, never mind. So this is my search query, but notice what it did. This was kind of cool. I actually discovered this yesterday. If you just hit there, it says, oh, by the way, guess what? Here's all your different columns that are available. It pre-fills all that stuff in for me. So you can see, and some of the stuff I don't want. So you'll notice that it ran this query and put it over here and say, you know what? I don't want any of this right here. Rerun it. Boom. Boom. Now, this is that GraphQL query that I can then use to my heart's desire in my system. And by the way, and we'll talk about it, you can dynamically create this in your app so that you can on the fly pull in different data from there. So this I kind of covered last week on how to do a customer here, but now we want to do something more interesting is when I get this order, i.e. order ID 10, and you'll notice it's just grabbing the first order since I'm using the get order. If I had get many orders, let's try that. Let's go get many orders. Okay. So the nomenclature is get and then many and then the name of the table. And if we go there, you'll see, oh, something doesn't like that. I'm not sure what that is. Didn't like that. Interesting. Not sure. Oh, I have to go something like this and put in order, records, and then put a little parentheses and a parenthesis here. Let's go. Let's see if that did. No, let me do this one right here. I'm going to cheat.
I think you just had one extra curly brace up there at the top, but you were close.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, I was very close on that. Actually, let me get back here. Get many. I go like this or wait. This is the tricky part. And once you get used to it, I'm still not fully used to it. Okay. Do I get rid of that? Yeah, it doesn't like. There we go. Okay. And then in here, I have to go records. And then in there, I paste this stuff. There we go. Okay.
All right.
So it's a little tricky. Once you get the idea behind it, it's a little cryptic, but once you get going there. Excuse me. So you'll see I'm using get many orders. Same thing here. I'm saying give me alpha key. This is the total number of orders. That's going to go ahead and total that for me. And then this magic word records says, go ahead and give me the records for those. And here are the fields. Let's go ahead and prettify that. Oh, it does it that way. Here are the fields I want from the sub. So you'll notice now it gives me a hierarchical representation of here's total count, and here are the specific orders that come in from each one from there. And again, you can modify this by just removing things like maybe I don't want alpha key in every one of those. There's no reason for that. So I'll rerun that. And now it just gives me the order information from there. And again, you can go beyond this. For instance, the employee ID and everything else, you can link up to that and do all that. You can write these against views. So if you want to kind of make your life easy, you can create views and then query views with GraphQL. It's pretty straightforward there. So the big difference is you can have parent-child relationship. And when you do that, you can then see it. But we haven't gotten to that yet. So let's go back to get one order here and let's show you the next step. So, okay. So this is basically getting a single order. So it's getting the first order 10643. And what I want to now do is get the order item. So how do I do that? Great. If I go right here to ship date and type get, it's order details. Okay, so what order details is what my order details are. So let's see if that works. Yep. And notice when I click go, it said, oh, order details is a child record. And in there, you have all of these cool fields that are available. So you can pick and choose which ones you want. So it hasn't run the query. It basically said, oh, these are available. So let me go ahead and just get rid of type name. And I'm going to go ahead and run it. And where's, oh, I think you have to actually do something with this like this. Wait, there we go. There we go. And you'll notice now it gives me the order data here. That's this information right here. And then it gives me a list or a group of records that are below this. And notice they're called order details. This is all JSON. So you can put this into a pointer variable and reference to it. And you'll see here's order ID number 1, or the first order for this order. I'm sorry, here's the first order detail, second. So think of them line items, and third from there. And so this allows you to just basically, now I can make a single call to this information. I can say, hey, server, give me back. It will take care of building all this, transversing, building that information, and pulling that data back and giving it to me in a JSON representation that I can use within my user interface or application or whatever from there. And that's where really you get the payoff, because traditionally what you would have to do is call this API, the first API to get your header data, and then you would have to call maybe 3 times to get the number of orders and get the detail for each one, or maybe there's a fancy one where at least you have to call 2. But also remember, in this case, I'm telling it which order items I want, or like the detail. So if I only wanted a couple things, like I just wanted, the quantity of what we've been doing there, I can change this. And now I don't have to do weird things and have multiple different API endpoints for different data you want to pull back. So it achieves that result of fewer number of calls with a lot less data. And again, to show you this all kind of works inside the system, go ahead and bring up here. I've gone ahead and published this to, let me get this out. Wait, there, I should have had it up there. Where is it? There it is. Okay. I'm going to use something called Insomnia. You could also use something called Postman. And this allows you to kind of exercise it. And I'm going to exercise the customer one just to show you how it works. So remember, this is the built-in test interface. Once I'm done with this, and I'll go ahead and close this, I just go ahead and publish this to my local server. So I'm going to go ahead and publish all my files here. Goes locally. Now these endpoints live on my server. So the way it works, and again, this is just to be tricky, here's the endpoint. Notice it's customer, and let me move this out of the way. So you'll notice my first one was called customer_GQL. So this is my server. Notice this part is my server name, and then this endpoint, and then that actual there. And then here is the payload I'm going to send to it. So to actually use it, once you publish this, and you haven't done the security yet, but once you publish this, then all you have to do is call that endpoint with a post transaction. That's very important. Most of the time you're used to get, where you're just calling and then it gives you information, maybe put some query strings. But now with this right here, you can basically, you do a post where this is the body you're giving it. So when I send it, and it takes a second. Oh, it's my server's not up. Let me turn my server on. That might help. There we go, and resend that. And boom, there's my data. And I can put in here. Now this doesn't auto complete, so you kind of I do stuff in my tester and then go from here. But you can see once I've got a good set of GraphQL query, I just paste it in there and I get the results right here. And I can do the same thing before where I can go order details. And let's go ahead and send that and see if that breaks it. Oh, now I got to do that. So let me go back into my tester. Oh, I know why that didn't work, because I don't have the right one. I completely screwed that up. Let me go back here, working preview. Let me go ahead and get this. Let's see, which one did it? Get order. Did that work? Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to take this. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go back into my GraphQL. Now, very important is remember, and I'm sorry I'm moving a little too fast, and I apologize about that. But remember, this is from order detail _2. And I was calling, so I have to put in here order detail _2, and I'll put in that, paste this, and send it, and voila, there's my data. Let me move this up and give you a moment to check it out there. So as you can see, once you get the vibe for it, it's really straightforward and works really, really well. Basically, this is, it's called GraphQL. This is the name of your service. So remember, it's order detail or customer GUI, whatever you want to call it, .a5 service. And you just hit that endpoint right there with this payload, and your data comes back and you can process it from there. And as you can see, it's very fast. I mean, it's super fast because everything is optimized on Alpha to make all this happen really quick. Everything happens at a very low level on the server. So all of that searching and sorting and updating and grabbing of specific fields, etc., is done once on the server in a very short period of time, then that whole payload, and then you're off to the races on there. So I'm going to take a few moment break here. I want to show you how I would build actually a UX to take advantage of it. It's a little more tricky than I'd like it to be, but I want to show you how that is just to give you an idea behind that. But in the meantime, see if there's any key questions from what I've presented so far.
Sure, yeah. In the example, you have get order, and then it's customer ID : elf key, which means return only records in which that key matches elf key. In SQL Server, that would be the where clause. And in SQL Server, you can do some pretty gnarly stuff, like give me the first 10 that match this other table and other crazy things like that. How far can you go in GraphQL? In fact, where would you even look as a resource to get information about how you would specify that kind of thing in GraphQL?
Gotcha. Great. So first, I always, my first stop is actually graphql.org. Let me go ahead and copy that. I'll put that into there. This is and it's kind of good, but they have Learn More, teaches you how to do this stuff from there. But the answer is yes, absolutely. You can come up with different ways of doing, sort of how to look up that data, and from those standpoints here. And let me see if I can find it. Queries, it's called queries is how it works. Right. And so, queries are how to build your query here, what the pieces are, what are the arguments to that query. But I want to find out where that was. It's very fancy. It's crazy what they've done on this. Let me see if I can find where that is. You can do things also like, for instance, you can say only give me a certain number of pages, so you can limit the amount of data that comes back. So if you have like a page, so actually the best thing is GraphQL query example. There's also generators and examples there. See, example search with print. I think it's search records. So, yeah, filter results. This kind of shows you a little bit more about it. Does that. So you can filter it. So they have a lot of different ways you can filter things, and it can get very, very complex. I mean, I'm just going to show you, like, you can get crazy on it. So you can actually pretty much do all of what you can do in SQL that you can in here. But, remember, you don't have to try and do everything in the query. You could set up, for instance, views that have already done a bunch of stuff for you and make it easier to query those things. So I would stick to simple kind of queries, and it does support things such as equals, greater than, etc., kind of your normal tier 1 SQL where clauses kind of scenario. But from in there, you can get a lot more fancy and do just amazing stuff from that standpoint. And I think as you get into it, you'll find that it pretty much so do everything you want it to do. You just have to spend a little time kind of understanding their syntax and nomenclature. And from that standpoint, let's see if there's anything in there. Like, for instance, here's an example saying, I want country USA. I want the first 3 skipping 0. So this is kind of like your, I want so many, you can start date. The other thing too is you can put, like, you can say country USA and then maybe city equals Boston. And in there, it's going to grab each of those and build up that SQL query for you. So you can have more than one kind of, and I believe it does it in a anding function, but then there are ways to do other things within that to make them a little fancier. Let's see, where is it? Is there any other ones? Yeah, here's an example. Here's some other stuff. Where city equals London. And this is actually an update customer mutation, meaning this allows you to actually update a customer. And so, to insert a record, you can say customer ID equals this, etc. Again, great documentation on the Alpha site. I really find this is a great source. And did I post that? I don't know if I posted it on there. Bad, Dan. You get that. Copy that. That's our documentation, Alpha's documentation. But you can do very fancy queries on there. Often, it will do more than you probably wanted to do from that standpoint.
Fantastic. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
And that looks like it for questions. If you want to dive
okay. So what I want to show you real quick is how you can actually consume the web service. So kind of like I'm going to circle around and go into basically how am I going to get that data from the REST service kind of scenario. And it turned out, a little trickier than I wanted it to be, but it was really not too hard. And they're going to show a little code here, so I don't want anybody to freak out. But I wanted to show, for instance, let's say I had a view box. Go ahead and close out and show what this is. So I've got a GraphQL view box, and a view box can have different types of data sources. So the data sources are list, JavaScript function, their database REST API. Now, I first started using REST API, but as far as I can tell, it's limited to GET requests. And remember when I talked about the fact that you're doing a post request because you got to give it this payload of data to the GraphQL engine so it knows what you want from there. So I wasn't able to get it with just by selecting, because if you just select, for instance, REST API, and you put in your API endpoint, this is the GET, it would call that location and do it from there. So then I did the backup where I did custom. And how custom works is that, and this works the same with lists and view boxes and other animals there, I can use a little bit of XBasic to actually make my call and bring the data back in. So what you do is you create a little XBasic function that will make a call to a REST endpoint and do that post transaction and bring it back. Neat thing is it took like 3 or 4 lines of code. It's not very, very complicated there. So first, let me walk you through the code to actually how you would call a REST API endpoint real quick. So let me go ahead and, let's go ahead in there, go in here and go to my XBasic and there. So I first used what's called an XBasic script. I went over to XBasic and created, because I wanted to kind of get it working and make sure everything's working great. Then once I got that working, I could then copy and paste this into a function that I could use with there. So pretty straightforward. Alpha has a really neat, powerful feature called, built-in function called HTTP post. You give it where you want to call and the body of it, and it gives you the results back. It's very, very straightforward. In fact, just to give you a pointer on that, let me go here. Actually, I want to go here. Where is it? Oh, keep hitting everything else. Let me go here. Okay. HTTP post. Okay, and I'll grab this. This describes everything about it. So we'll copy that, send that out to the team there. Oops, ignore that last plus. I screwed that up there. So what happens is first I have a URL, and remember it is that server GraphQL, and in this case, customer GraphQL.A5 service. Basically what I had right here. before I changed it there. Then the next thing I have is I need to create a request body. Well, all that needs to be in that request body is this information right here, that GraphQL query. So that's all that needs to be in there. Now, the way I did this is I could have created line, but Alpha has a nice little feature where you can say, take, all of these, and this is just one string. And you can use that. You just basically, when let's say you're going to create a string here, you can say, my string is equal to, and then if you use the left caret, you'll see that you can sort of encapsulate a whole series of rows between a starting and end point, and it treats it as a single variable. And then I don't have to do fancy stuff like building up line after line. But realize, and this is very important down the road, this is static, but there's no reason I couldn't on the fly create this request body. So if I wanted to have phone in here, I could maybe say, oh, add phone into this piece of text here, and then spit it out. So that's what's really cool, is you can create sort of dynamic payloads as you go from there. So what I do is I get that result. I basically call HTTP post with the URL in the request body. It then returns information called a result right here. And then I'm doing some other just little tricky things where I'm turning it into a pointer so I can extract the data. So let me go ahead and run this real quick and show you. So it makes that call. And in a moment, it brings me back a JSON string. Now, let me show you something here. Let me just go ahead, and before I go into that, and it's not, I don't want to get too crazy here, but I do want to show you what I did here so it's not confusing. So first, I'm going to show what came back, okay? So and this is the part where you have to kind of play with it, but once you got the model, you're good to go. So you can see what comes back from the server is actually not just this information, but that whole payload. And again, you can see that here. When I run it in here, you see that it gives me a lot of other data and then the information itself. So the only tricky part of mine in the post is very straightforward. Only tricky part is once you have gotten this data back, all I really want in this case is this information right here. So what I often do is that I turn it into a result pointer, and then you'll see that I just have to say, oh, give me the data element and the get customer. So actually, let me do something real quick and show you what that looks real quick. Result pointer. And then let's just not show, but I'll show both of them. Okay. So you'll see that it's data, get customer, and then the information I want. So when I turn this into a pointer, then I can say, give me the result pointer, data, same exact text, get customer. And what it's going to do is run down this chain and get to this point and then say, just give me back right there. So now I'm going to click OK, and notice I'm going to show you just that information here, and voila, I get their data there. So you may have to spend a few minutes, it's not very long, to go through this, just kind of get exactly what that data is. And then once you have that information, you basically have your sort of script that you can do. So let's go back into my my UX here. I think I have it up over here. Okay. So I went into the data source and I said, hey, I want to call an XBasic function. I'll show you in a moment. And that XBasic function will basically call that endpoint and give me back a set of JSON. Now I can go in here and watch when I click here, it actually makes a call. It takes a moment. And oh, look, customer ID, company name in there. So that sort of like when I cleaned it up and gave back that just those 3 values in JSON, the ViewBox builder said, oh, great, I know what fields are in there. What do you want to do with them? So then I go to my layout and I put them here, and I can adjust this. I can use freeform there. So now when I run this working preview, you can see it's grabbed Alfke, the name, and the contact name right there. Now, this is hard coded right now, meaning that if I go over and look at my XBasic function, you're going to see here's my URL, here's my body, but you'll notice in here I've hard coded Alfke. So it's hard coded that body. So every time I make this call, it's going to grab just Alfke there. So if you will bear with me, I'll show you how we can make that dynamic. So what I'm going to do is just go in here. I'm going to add a text box. Let's call it account ID, or no, customer ID is what it's called, I think. Here, hold on a second. customer ID. Okay. Oh, add controlled text box. There we go. Add it, and then I'll go customer ID. There we go. Okay. And I'm going to default that to AlphaKey just so if I run it without doing any. There you go. And you could make this like, for instance, a drop-down box. You could even populate this from GraphQL too. You never, as a drop-down box, up to you. So what I want to do is when I put in here and then click go, it's going to update that. So let's go ahead and add a button here. And because Alpha is so simple, I can just say refresh. And in that button, I'll go in and I'll say add an action, view box control actions. And I just want to refresh the data. So that's step number one. So basically what I want to do now is when I click there, it's just going to call this and refresh this. This, when it says refresh, is going to call that xbasic function. So what I want to do is every time this runs, I want to use customer ID in that. So I'm going to go over here. And the first thing I'm going to do, and this is that function it's calling, is I'm going to say customer ID is equal to e dot, oops, I'm going to use my cool new thing, control D, customer ID. Note, I did this a couple weeks ago. If you hit control D, it pops up a list of stuff. So you click there and it writes the whole statement for you there. Now what I need to do is replace this with that customer ID. So I'm going to use a little trick here. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to go curly bracket, customer ID. And you could do it your way, but then, and then I'm going to use something here called string. I'm going to say request body, and I apologize, it's a little more coding than normal, is equal to string tran request body, comma, and then I put in there customer ID, comma, customer ID. Okay, so what happens here is we grab it from the user interface, we do this thing called string tran, which is going to go find this little piece of text, you'll notice right here, and replace it with what's there. So let's see, and this might break. I haven't, this I'm kind of flying blind, but let's give this a try and see what happens if it's smart enough there. Yeah, oh, no. First time it runs, it tries to render that box. Oh, ooh, that's tough. I should have test run this, sorry everybody. But the idea is then when I do this customer ID, I can then do the substitution, and when it runs, it will then create my payload using, say, a different customer ID, and then the information will come back for that customer there. The tricky part here is that when I open this up, it's trying to load that view box. Actually, you know what? If, yeah, it doesn't like this, because what it is, it's trying to look up this edata.data submitted, but when you start, this only happens when you call back after it's rendered. So I kind of screwed up, I'm sorry. Went off the reservations on there. But I hope this gives you a little more of a feel for how you would approach it. Is basically the way I would solve that is instead of using edata.submitted, there's another method we could use on that. But what you want to do is this payload right here is what I like to call fungible. You could add different fields that you want back. You could add different where clauses, etc. within here. So you're not stuck with hard coding. Now, reality is most of the time, you kind of just need to replace one thing in there. The rest you're going to want, because this is how you populate your user interface. And what's cool about view boxes is I could actually feed a view box all of this information here, and it would render like, a header and then lines for each one of them. So there's a huge amount of flexibility in terms of using this JSON data when it comes back on your user interface from there. So I kind of went into the weeds a little bit there, but I wanted to show you that part of the process is giving this, actually, let me try this. If, I'm not going to waste any more time. What I need to do is that I would check to see if this is valid. And if it's not valid, just go ahead and set it to AlphaKey. And then if it is valid, then it would actually pull that data in there. It's a trick you can use when you're especially in working preview and stuff. You can see if that variable actually exists. If it does, then go ahead and use it. If not, put in a test variable to use during that, or just set it to blank and not let anything in there from there. What's happening is when it loads this UX, it's saying, oh, I don't see e.data submitted, so I'm going to throw an error, and it won't work beyond there. So I apologize on that. So
before we leave this XBasic function, we do have a question. And so you were talking
Yes.
about the function that you used was I think I don't see it here on the screen, but it's HTTP post. And so the
Yep.
question is, would it be possible, like I think there were some built-in curl commands in Alpha, would it be possible to use curl command instead, given that curl commands, I believe, do posts also?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And it's a really good point is that you can use, like, let's go ahead and go right here. And I think you can create, you can actually grab this as a curl command, but let's, what you can do is once you have your curl command, you can right click here and say Genie, curl command to XBasic. You paste in there and it will generate the XBasic for you. So yeah, that's another way to do it. And it will take care of a lot of the complexity, especially if you have a little bit more complex endpoint kind of scenario. I found this is simple because you're really just calling a URL and the body has the JSON you want from that standpoint. But yeah, you could absolutely use the curl to XBasic to generate those, to generate the XBasic to make that call. Now, down the road, might add post capabilities to the API or to the view box, but I don't think it's a priority now, but that would allow you to do it. There's some tricky parts because if you set the URL endpoint, you also have to tell it what's the payload and how you populate that. So it gets a little trickier there, but good observation. Curl command is really handy. I've used it a lot when interfacing with other systems because often documentation from those systems will give you example curl commands. So you don't have to kind of dissect everything. You just paste it in here, click generate XBasic, and it just works.
Terrific. That looks like it for questions.
Excellent question. And I do apologize for going off in the weeds too much there. Gotta try. You gotta break.
That's what we're here for. You gotta try. You gotta break things. Exactly.
Yeah.
That looks like.
I think the way. Wait, I'm gonna do this. If eval valid.
All right.
Watch this. Okay, copy that. And then make the call.
Mm-hmm.
Oops, sorry. Else can't spell. Let's see if that works. Okay. So now I can go in here and put blonde P. Click refresh. Ah, it didn't work. Wonder why. I'll have to check that out. Well, I got halfway there. So basically, yeah. Well, we won't waste anybody's time, but that's sort of how I do it. I'm checking to see, this is a cool little command. It says, hey, if I ask you this XBasic, will it fail? And if it does, I'll know if from that standpoint. So apparently each time it's failing.
Variable has been initialized.
Yeah, it's kind of a peek under the covers before you do something wrong.
Fantastic. Great.
Cool.
Hey, Dan, thank you very much for your presentation today.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone who joined us. Thank you, Sarah, for being here. Next week, we return. Sarah Mitchell will be presenting. If you do have questions in the meantime, you can always send them to guides, GUIDES @alphasoftware.com. Until then, take care and stay well. Bye-bye.